General Zalrax stood rigid before the towering assembly of the Imperial High Council, his scarred mandibles clicking with restrained frustration. The chamber, a vast dome of polished obsidian, reflected the cold indifference of the gathered elites. Rows of alien dignitaries observed him with an air of amused detachment, their robes shimmering in the artificial light. "I speak today not as a soldier seeking favor," Zalrax began, his voice rough with age and battle-worn experience, "but as one who has seen what lurks beneath the surface of this so-called primitive world." The youngest of the council, a sleek-furred noble named Vorek, leaned forward, an arrogant smirk playing at his lips. "We have heard your reports, General. But are we truly expected to believe that a species with no interstellar fleet, no planetary defenses, and no history of galactic warfare could pose a threat to the Empire?" Zalrax's forearms flexed unconsciously, a muscle memory born of decades on the battlefield. He had heard this same sentiment before, just before his division had been shredded in the chaos of Earth's hellish resistance. "They do not fight as you expect," he said, his voice low but insistent. "They do not adhere to the rules of war we have come to understand. They are relentless, adaptable, and they do not know when they are beaten." A murmur rippled through the chamber, though most of the counselors remained unconvinced. Supreme Chancellor Orves, a massive being with gelatinous silver skin, flicked the languid hand. "We understand that your past engagements have affected you. However, we must consider the facts. We are an empire of 1,000 worlds. They are one planet." He exhaled, as if the matter had already been decided. "This is nothing more than the last bark of a dying animal." Zalrax stepped forward, ignoring the collective intake of breath from the assembly. He had once been lauded as a hero, a commander whose victories had expanded the Empire's reach. Now he was a relic, but he would not let these fools doom themselves to the same fate that had nearly taken him. "I fought them," he said, voice sharp with the weight of memory. "On a colony world, before we even knew their full strength. A scouting party. We expected them to break like all the others." His mandibles tightened. "We were wrong." The images came unbidden. Shadows moving through the shattered ruins of a once proud Imperial outpost. His soldiers, elite and disciplined, picked off one by one in the dead of night. Explosions erupting in places no enemy should have reached. The silence of the battlefield when it should have been filled with the cries of surrender. They do not simply fight. They think. They manipulate the battlefield itself. His lower arms curled into fists as he took another step forward. "They will not meet us in open combat. They will lure us into their cities, into their forests, into their frozen wastes, where every shadow is a weapon." He met the Chancellor's gaze directly, a challenge in his stance. "And they will not stop. Not until every last one of them is dead." A snort from the back of the chamber. The young General Vorek again, his expression full of smug derision. "And yet here you stand alive. Tell me, if these humans are such monsters, why did they let you leave?" Zalrax's throat rumbled with a suppressed growl. "Because they wanted me to. Because they knew I would come back and warn you." He let the silence stretch, watching the amusement fade from Vorek's face. "They are not simply warriors. They are strategists. They let me live because they knew you would not believe me." Another murmur spread, uneasy this time. Even those who had dismissed him were beginning to shift uncomfortably. The council was made up of politicians and aristocrats, but even they could recognize a predator when they saw one. Chancellor Orves made a dismissive gesture, though there was a stiffness in his movements now. "Your account is compelling, General, but we have crushed countless worlds before. Superior numbers and superior technology always prevail. What makes Earth different?" Zalrax exhaled slowly, knowing these words would likely be his last before they dismissed him entirely. He had seen what was coming, and they would not listen. Because they are not fighting for conquest. They are not fighting for power. They are fighting for survival. He turned, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the cold lights of the chamber. And when a species fights for survival, they do not follow rules. They do not submit. They do not stop. He paused at the threshold, casting one final look at the assembled leaders. They only grow stronger. With that, he left the chamber, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed. The skies above Earth darkened with the arrival of the Imperial fleet. Thousands of warships, sleek and angular, descended through the planet's atmosphere like silent predators. Their hulls gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the arrogance of those who commanded them. From the bridge of the emissary of Dominion, High General Vorek stood with arms folded, his golden armor pristine, his expression one of utter confidence. "Begin the operation," he ordered. A chorus of confirmations rang through the control deck. Orbital bombardments commenced, streaks of plasma carving through the sky as the Empire sought to break Earth's will before its soldiers even touched the ground. Explosions rippled through major cities. London, Beijing, New York, Moscow, all chosen for their strategic importance. Entire blocks vanished in firestorms, sending thick plumes of smoke spiraling into the heavens. And yet, despite the devastation, the response was not what Vorek had expected. There was no desperate surrender, no transmission pleading for terms, no central authority collapsing under the weight of fear. Instead, Earth went silent. For a moment, a sliver of unease coiled in Vorek's gut, but he dismissed it. The planet had no defense against the Empire. Their outdated aircraft, their crude weapons, none of it would be enough. Then the ground war began. Troop carriers descended onto the surface, deploying vast columns of alien soldiers, trained warriors from dozens of conquered species, all marching under the Imperial banner. The first waves landed in the remains of ruined cities, expecting little more than scattered resistance. What they found was emptiness. Vorek watched from the command deck, his fingers tapping against the metal railing. "Where are they?" he muttered. His advisors had warned of civilian panic, of leaders scrambling for negotiation. Instead, the humans had simply vanished. Moments later, the first ambushes began. It started in the ruins of New York. Imperial squads patrolling the skeletal remains of buildings found themselves caught in unseen crossfires. Snipers hidden in the wreckage picked off commanders with impossible precision. Soldiers disappeared into alleyways, dragged into darkness, their screams cut short. Then came the traps. Roads collapsed beneath marching forces, revealing tunnels lined with explosives. Imperial supply convoys, crucial for sustaining the invasion, were reduced to fire and twisted wreckage. A patrol entered an abandoned subway station, only for the entrance to detonate behind them, sealing them in darkness. Reports flooded in from every landing zone. Enemy forces engaging in guerrilla tactics. Advancing units eliminated before they can establish forward bases. Supply lines cut off. Communications disrupted. Vorek gritted his teeth. "Why aren't they fighting in the open?" he snapped. Zorax's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, "They will not meet us in open combat." Asterisk, he had dismissed the old general's warning. Now, the consequences were unraveling before him. At first, the soldiers sent to flush out the resistance believed themselves superior. They had armor, energy-based weaponry, aerial support. Yet, the humans fought like phantoms, striking and disappearing before retaliation was possible. Survivors from ambushed platoons spoke of inhuman endurance, soldiers continuing to fight despite grievous wounds, refusing to surrender, refusing to break. Even when outnumbered, even when overwhelmed, they kept fighting. Vorek stared at the latest casualty reports. In a single day, the Empire had suffered more losses than in entire planetary campaigns. That should have been impossible. Another transmission crackled through the command deck. "Sir, we are detecting interference across all Imperial communication channels." Vorek's eyes narrowed. "Explain. Something is jamming our signals." He turned sharply. "We control orbital superiority." "How could they?" The holoscreen flickered. A transmission forced its way through the Imperial network, overriding all frequencies. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a plea for mercy. It was music, a deep, steady drumbeat. Then a voice. "We told you not to come." A chill crept up Vorek's spine. The voice was calm, controlled, unshaken. "You assumed we would kneel, that we would surrender, that we would fear you." Something in the tone sent a ripple of unease through the officers gathered around the command deck. You mistake silence for weakness. Across the battlefields, Imperial soldiers hesitated. The words were being broadcast into their helmets, their ships, their bases. They could not escape it. We are not afraid of you. The music grew louder. The transmission cut. For the first time in his career, Vorek felt fear. The silence that followed was not the quiet of defeat. It was the quiet before a storm. Vorek stood rigid on the command deck of the Emissary of Dominion, staring at the war reports flashing across the holoscreen. The numbers made no sense. They couldn't make sense. Entire regiments lost. Supply routes obliterated. Communications in disarray. Every standard invasion model had predicted swift subjugation. Overwhelming firepower, superior numbers, and technological dominance ensuring the Empire's swift victory. And yet, Earth had not only survived, it had adapted. It had fought back, and now it was winning. The reports were filled with contradictions. Imperial forces engaged in firefights against an enemy that should have been in retreat, only to find themselves flanked, outmaneuvered, and systematically dismantled. Humans did not fight fair, they fought like predators, striking when least expected and melting away before counterattacks could be executed. Some reports were more disturbing. A squadron had cornered a group of human fighters in the frozen wastelands of Siberia. Outnumbered, with no visible escape, the humans should have surrendered. Instead, they'd fought to the last man, refusing to break even as their bodies failed them. The final transmissions from the squad's commanding officer had been little more than incoherent screaming before the signal cut out. Vorek turned his gaze to the planetary surface below. The sprawling expanse of Earth, once seen as ripe for conquest, now felt like a trap, a vast, living entity that absorbed everything the Empire threw at it and spat out ruin in return. A voice crackled through the bridge's comms. "High General, our forces are requesting immediate extraction from multiple battlefronts." They're reporting. The officer hesitated, his voice unsteady. "Psychological collapse, sir. The troops are afraid." Vorek clenched his jaw. Afraid? Imperial soldiers were engineered for war, conditioned to view battle as a glorious pursuit. Fear was for the weak, for those who lacked discipline. And yet, he had seen the same terror spreading like a disease through the ranks. Soldiers hesitated before stepping into the ruins. Officers avoided eye contact when reporting their losses. "Fear is a human weapon," Zalrax had said. Vorek had dismissed the old general's warnings as cowardice. He had been a fool. An alarm blared through the ship. A new transmission forced its way into their secure networks. No encryption, no demands, just a simple message. "Run." Then the orbital bombardment stopped. The command deck erupted in confusion. "Sir, our artillery is failing to lock onto targets. Systems are being overridden." "How?" "The humans shouldn't even be able to access our—" The answer came before the officer could finish his sentence. The holoscreens flickered, displaying footage from an orbital facility overtaken by human forces. Vorek felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Humans had captured Imperial technology. The next reports confirmed it. The humans had hacked the Empire's targeting systems. They had studied Imperial weapons. They were using them. For the first time in the Empire's history, the invaders had become the hunted. On the surface, battlefields that had once been chaotic skirmishes transformed into organized counteroffensives. Human soldiers, once scattered and decentralized, were now coordinating with frightening precision. They had learned, and they were winning. In Africa, an entire Imperial battalion was cut off and annihilated after an artificial sandstorm. Human-engineered, disrupted their equipment. In Asia, legions of alien soldiers vanished into jungle terrain, never heard from again. In the frozen expanse of Antarctica, an entire Imperial fortress went dark overnight. Its occupants found weeks later, frozen solid in their own armor. The silence before the storm was over. The storm was here. Vorek watched helplessly as human forces launched their first counterattack in space. The stolen orbital platform turned its cannons toward the Imperial fleet. Human engineers had repurposed it in days, using it as a battering ram against the ships that once loomed over their world. Plasma fire erupted. The first Imperial warships exploded from within, their own weapons used against them. Vorek's hands clenched into fists. "Pull back the fleet," he ordered. "Sir, we need to regroup." He refused to call it a retreat. "Prepare the jump drives." Silence. Then the officer at the helm whispered, "Sir, the humans have locked our engines." Vorek's heart pounded. "How?" A new transmission crackled through the speakers. A human voice, calm and unshaken. "You thought we were prey." The voice was female, steady, without fear. "You thought we would break." Outside the viewport, another Imperial ship burst into flames. "You were wrong." Vorek turned, eyes blazing with fury. "Shut it off." The officer frantically worked the controls, but the transmission continued. "This is our world," the human voice continued, "and you are not welcome here." Vorek's breath came hard and fast. He had never felt helpless before, never felt the weight of true defeat. A new alarm blared. The humans had launched their final strike. For the first time in his life, Vorek understood the meaning of fear. Vorek ran. His boots pounded against the shattered stone, the rhythmic sound drowned by the distant roar of warships descending. The sky above was painted with streaks of fire as the last remnants of the Imperial fleet were hunted down like wounded animals. The air reeked of scorched metal, blood, and the acrid tang of something far worse. Asterisk, asterisk, the stench of a dying empire. Asterisk, asterisk. The dock was close. If he could reach a transport, if he could escape the capital, there might still be a chance to regroup, to rebuild. The Empire had spanned 1,000 systems. Surely, there were still strongholds left, fleets waiting to be called upon. This could not be the end. A shadow passed overhead. Vorek skidded to a stop. A human warship loomed above the ruined skyline, its dark hull gleaming in the light of the capital's fires. It bore none of the elegance of an Imperial vessel. There were no unnecessary adornments, no polished crests of nobility. It was built for one purpose. War asterisk asterisk. The dropships followed. Sleek and angular, they descended with mechanical precision, landing amidst the ruins with a hiss of pressurized air. Their doors slid open, and the soldiers emerged. They moved like shadows given form, weapons raised, scanning the ruins with the patience of hunters who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. They were not the same desperate fighters the Empire had first encountered on Earth. These soldiers were disciplined, methodical. Victors who had learned from their enemies and surpassed them. A voice echoed through the war-torn streets, amplified by unseen speakers. Asterisk, High General Vorek. Asterisk, his breath hitched. They knew who he was. They had come for him. Asterisk, the war is over. Asterisk, he felt a sharp spike of defiance, his hands balling into fists. No, the war was not over. It could not be over. The Empire had ruled for centuries. A single species could not have undone all of that. And yet they had. Vorek's fingers twitched toward the sidearm holstered at his hip. He could make a stand, die a warrior's death, refuse to kneel. A figure stepped through the smoke. A human, clad in the dark, unadorned armor of their new military. A helmet obscured their face, but Vorek could feel their gaze locking onto him, unyielding in a way that even the Empire had never been. No malice, no hatred, only certainty. The certainty of a warrior who had already won. Vorek's hand froze above his weapon. He could fight. He could die. But it would mean nothing. The Empire was gone. No death here would change that. Slowly, his hand fell away from the pistol. His knees buckled. And for the first time in his life, High General Vorek of the Imperial Dominion bowed his head. Above him, the human warships hung in the sky like silent gods. And the Empire, eternal and absolute, was no more.